In the current day, fighting games are mostly dead. For active, non-indie producers, you've mainly got Capcom, and even they have largely scaled back, Arcsys, who makes the Guilty Gear games, and NetherRealm, who makes Mortal Kombat and Injustice exclusively. But there is another, lurking, releasing a game every 5 years between a constant stream of porting their old arcade titles to anything and everything that can run them, SNK. SNK was much more of a force in the 90s, and since has continued to shrink and fall into semi-obscurity. The Neo Geo Pocket was their attempt at throwing a hat into the handheld ring, with the Neo Geo Pocket Color being its successor. It was mostly a failure, with each revision barely lasting 2 years in Japan and doing even worse elsewhere. But for what it is, it's a great console, way more powerful than the Gameboy Color, and predating the GBA by a few years. The clicky stick is great and it has a lot of neat little games on it, mostly miniaturized versions of SNK's big titles. In the case of today's video, Samurai Shodown 2! Pocket Fighting Series, which is essentially a demake of the second Samurai Shodown 64 game, Warrior's Rage, including all but one of the characters, but bringing back 2 returning characters who weren't in the arcade version, as well as bringing over its story endings and even gameplay gimmicks, making it an absurdly faithful adaptation of a full-blown 3D fighter. The game initially released for the Neo Geo Pocket Color, but fairly recently got its first re-release, the first re-release of any Neo Geo Pocket Color game in fact, as a pre-order bonus for the Switch version of Samurai Shodown 2019, and more recently as one of 10 games in the amazing Neo Geo Pocket Color Selection Volume 1 on Switch and PC, released in early 2021. While it is one of the few games I have for my Neo Geo Pocket Color, I'll be playing on the Switch because it's a lot easier to capture. Samurai Shodown 2 is a pretty straightforward fighting game. It's 2D, you attempt to kill your opponent, and the winner is whoever succeeds. One of the quirks of the game is its 2-button layout, thanks to the constraints of the console. The arcade game it's based on used 4, and most fighters use 6, which serves as both a constraint on how complex the game can be, but also makes it a bit more simple and easier for people to learn. A is punch, while B is utility, dodges, parries, basically everything else. It's a good summation that even people pretty new to fighters can understand. The game is also really fast-paced, likely due to being designed for pick-up and play, with high damage and short matches, which I quite like. Each character also shares a few techniques that are useful for pretty much everything. Forward plus A is always a guard break move that breaks blocking, and back plus A is always a grab, which is useful for breaking through stall. Forward B and down B are both parries for mid-height and low-height respectively, which serve as a hard punish on good reads, leaving the parried opponent extremely open, and of course a super meter, which only charges on taking damage, making it more of a comeback mechanic than a win mechanic. A little sad because it's a little less flashy, but it makes sense in a game that's as high-paced as this. Meter can be used in 3 ways. Super moves, obviously, which are all done with back, forward, down, and A, and are powerful moves. Rage Explosion, which by pressing both attacks at once, launches the opponent backwards to reset the game to a neutral state in a bad position. And the Samurai Combination System, an auto combo that can be started with moves performed on back plus A. It's worth noting that stun and knockdown are pretty big in this game. Big hits give big punishment, which I know is generally frowned upon, although given this game's already trimmed down gameplay and made a bit more, casual, but not in a bad way, I think it's passable here. The game also carries over a feature from the arcade games that serves to add some variety to the roster, Slash and Bust mode, which modify anywhere from about half of a character's special moves to give them some variety in playstyle, to completely reinventing them and replacing all of their special moves. Characters generally have 4 specials and a super for each of their 2 forms, although there is a couple characters that fall outside of that. They can pretty heavily alter a character's playstyle, though not so much that you'd be thrown off, and you'll probably develop a preference one way or the other. On top of all this is cards, a kinda interesting and wacky twist. Each character has 4 cards for each of their forms, and can equip 2 at a time, which are unlocked by playing through the arcade mode. Power up raises attack, defense up raises defense, special move adds a new special move, and power up special makes a special move stronger, usually giving it a few more hits and generally increasing its damage. The card system is a neat gimmick. The fact that you get some for other characters, not just the one you used upon completing the arcade game, is a good incentive to try new characters and play around. Plus you can trade cards with friends if you have them and use them in multiplayer. I won't be discussing the card moves too much due to the lack of information on this game available and the solid amount of grinding it would entail to get all of them. The game selection of modes is pretty small. Arcade mode is about what you'd expect. 6 fights that are set by character, then the bosses, which is first Haohmaru, then a fight against a character being possessed by Yuga, which is either Asura or Shiki, then Gendara, an unplayable large boss who stands in place and throws out powerful attacks, then finally Yuga. Survival mode is your typical endless wave of battles, and then there's versus mode. On the Neo Geo Pocket Color, this requires 2 consoles and 2 games, but the Switch collection has local emulated multiplayer, which is a huge plus for it. Samurai Shodown 2 is great, especially for a handheld fighter. Most handheld fighters are cheap, janky crap, but this one is really solid. The 2-button setup and small move lists make it accessible, avoiding over complexity, but without sacrificing high-paced, solid fighting gameplay. 2D visuals are always a realm that SNK has been basically unbeatable in. Metal Slug, King of Fighters, and of course Samurai Shodown, and that same visual mastery is still on display here, just smaller. The chibi style is really cute, and despite it, and the limitations of the console, there's really solid animations for each fighter too, pretty reliant on keyframes over absurdly smooth animations, but nonetheless incredibly detailed for what the game is. The use of color is cool too. They couldn't go all out with colors, so instead they use a key color for shading while leaving the rest white, which has its own kind of style that helps them stand out. Backgrounds are really detailed and make good use of the more dense coloring allowed to them to give a lot of set variety. Each stage has a day and night version it switches to between rounds, which is always a plus, but the stage order also silently tells the story of the game. The first stage is peaceful and ends with a little fireworks scene, then a few stages in, Yuga nukes Japan. The stage after is on fire, and the next is the city's ruins and rubbles, and it's a really unique way to incorporate story into what's usually just random pretty scenery. The game's few cutscenes are really well animated, besides the typos. I wish I felt better about the music, which is mostly nice, tiny versions of the characters' themes from the mainline games. While they don't come across very strongly here, they're very mellow and kind of lack energy. They're not awful by any means, just not exactly what you'd expect from a fighter this fast-paced. The game features 16 playable characters, although one of those only serves as a random select. Yuga is only available via cheat code, and like I said before, the 17th character, Gandara, is unplayable. Haohmaru is the protagonist of the Samurai Shodown series in the same way Ryu is for Street Fighter, where he's mostly just the guy in the box art. He's based on Miyamoto Musashi, one of Japan's most famous historical samurai, and is often referenced in their fiction. True to his inspiration, or at least the legend of his inspiration, Haohmaru is a wandering duelist, although he's generally a good guy. Being the Ryu of the game, he's fairly balanced, although leans a bit into power over speed. You'll have to forgive me for not always knowing what the moves do. The resources for this game in English are extremely limited and there's no training mode, so I can't just lab things out very easily. Regardless of form, Haohmaru has his Crescent Moon Slash, which is an uppercut on Shoryuken inputs, which is a really great move with great priority to let him hit through incoming attacks, and the Secret Cyclone Slash on the Hadouken input, which creates a small tornado projectile to launch opponents straight up. Depending on if it's the low or high toss, and I'm not sure how to decide which one you get, it allows follow-ups into either another tornado for low or an aerial for high, which gives him good access to at least small combos. As far as it goes for his forms, Bust seems a little stronger for him. Slash gets a short-range attack with his bottle that does very little as far as I can tell, as well as a grappling move, while his super is an extremely short-range extended version of the Crescent Moon Slash that's pretty tough to land. While Bust gets a jumping sword slash that hits low, and a dash that lets him get in close, much faster. Bust's super is a bit riskier, being a super version of his jumping sword slash. Unlike Slash's super, he needs to land it for the rest of the hits to come out, and it's fairly predictable and spacing dependent, but I find Bust to be largely more consistent at applying pressure. Haohmaru's fun, he's a good starting character for getting into the game's mechanics, especially if you like characters who hit pretty hard. Cyclone juggling is fun as hell, and he's pretty balanced, making him ideal for learning how other characters operate without being completely outmatched. Asura is the main character of Samurai Shodown 64 Warrior's Rage, and by extension this game. Like the final boss Yuga, he comes from Makai the Demon World, and the two have been rivals, trying to take each other down for God knows how long. Asura is a good portion of the original Asura, who was created by Yuga, and has since attempted to destroy his original self as well as Yuga. Samurai Shodown 2 misspells Asura's name as Asura. I'm unsure if this is a simple error or an attempt to distance the character from its religious origins, as an Asura is a part of Hindi mythology, demigods with a lust for power. Asura is a heavy hitter. He's slow and doesn't chain his attacks well, but his attacks pack a punch, high risk, high reward. Unlike Haohmaru, Asura's different forms highly change his playstyle as well as his allegiance, as Bust Asura is under Yuga's control, replacing all of his moves, with each taking him in a different direction. Slash making his specials quicker options that mitigate his slowness, while Bust leans even further into huge damage at the cost of loss of vulnerability. To illustrate this, Slash has a basic projectile and the classic down, forward input, which shoots a fairly quick arrow that deals okay damage and briefly stuns the opponent, while in the same input, Bust shoots a laser that crosses most of the screen and deals far more damage, but takes longer to start up, making it easier to block and longer to end, making it more punishable. For other moves, Slash can spring a spike from below, which works good as a trap against block hits, as well as a counter attack, and for his super, Asura shoots a mid-range blast and traps opponents in a cage to chop them up. This one seems fairly inconsistent. For its middling range, it has a long startup that makes it pretty blockable. Bust mode replaces the spike with lightning from above. It hits high, so it can't be used to break block and is slow, but is both incredibly powerful as a follow-up move on hit and a good anti-air. He also has a long-range command grab that slowly slides across the ground. It's very avoidable, but hits hard when it does land. And lastly, the Lei Tag Ragu, funny name. Extremely long wind-up and vulnerability, making it predictable and punishable, but breaking blocks and dealing gigantic damage. The super is somewhat ironically much easier to land than Slash's, with Asura turning into a ball of shadow and traveling nearly full screen fairly quickly. Up close it's far more reliable than the other. Asura's different forms have an interesting dynamic. I personally prefer Slash, where his downsides are mitigated, making him more well-rounded and enjoyable, but the all-out bust mode is pretty fun too. I enjoy both a lot, although I don't think the heavy style is for me personally. Charlotte Christine de Colde is one of the 2 characters added into Samurai Shodown 2 that weren't in Warrior's Rage, presumably because she was a fan favorite. She's a French noble, one of very few non-Japanese characters in the game, and spends her time in Japan cleaning up other people's messes. Charlotte is a bit speedier than the others, but relies pretty heavily on her normals, like the triangle slashes that are fairly active and multi-hit. Both of her forms are effectively the same. They share an uppercut, which is a good combo finisher and goes to the top of the screen, making it a janky anti-air, which each has its own projectile and super to differentiate them. Bust projectile is slower but longer range, while Slashes covers less distance but comes out faster and hits harder. Their supers are nearly identical. Bust feels like it's active slightly longer when it starts, and Slash feels like it has slightly higher range. I don't particularly love using Charlotte either way, although I do think Slash is largely the better of the 2, as her bust projectile is nearly unusable. Galford D. Weller's the other non-Japanese character on the roster. He hails from San Francisco, California, which during this game in the late 1700s was a part of New Spain. After his sheriff father is murdered, he travels the world to find strength and trains with ninjas to become a hero for justice. Galford is one of the few characters who has substantial differences in his normals between forms, with Bust being a touch slower and harder hitting, while Slash is more balanced. The 2 share a unique action. While being comboed, pressing back and B causes Galford to use ninja replacement to teleport away and attack the opponent from above, basically a hard counter and punishment to overextending opponents, which feels both fantastic and overpowered simultaneously. Bust Galford is more true to his main appearances in the series, pairing him up with his husky Poppy, who's super cute in her little chibi form. All of his specials, save for Shadow Copy, which teleports him above opponents, utilize Poppy to attack, dropping her from above to cause them to block high so Galford can go low, a low command grab that has Poppy hold the opponent still to give Galford an opening, and so on. She operates halfway independently, where even if Galford is hit, she'll continue her move, making the duo pretty tricky when together. This form plays with slower, harder hits, which makes sense as it's all based around creating openings with Poppy, who, speaking of, also serves as the super, although she runs across the screen fairly slowly, making it inconsistent. Slash Galford ditches Poppy, instead being a more traditional balanced character, maintaining the teleport but adding in a series of electricity-based moves. A basic projectile, although he's locked into it until it lands or he dissipates it manually by pressing an attack button, an anti-air shock above him, and a very cool long-range command grab with a slick animation where he kicks the opponent over him and slashes them down with a lightning sword for huge damage when it lands. His super is also incredibly strong and reliable, dropping powerful lightning on the opponents from above, mildly predictable and therefore blockable, but still doing decent chip damage even if it is blocked. As far as it goes, Bust is the more interesting form, being unique from pretty much everyone else in the game, with one exception, with a really cool style of baiting hits with Poppy, but Slash is probably better technically, having a stronger variety of tools at his disposal, although it does make him a bit more generic, and kinda missing out at looking at Poppy. She's very, very cute in this game. Hanzo Hattori is the main ninja of the Samurai Shodown games, based on the historical figure of the same name, who led a clan of ninjas and has a bunch of other characters based on him in other popular Japanese media. Like in real life, or at least the legend of it, Hanzo leads the Iga ninjas as part of the Tokugawa clan, and in earlier games was looking to rescue his son, although in this game he's kinda not got a lot going on. Like everyone else, he kinda just doesn't like Yuga. Both of Hanzo's forms are what I would call contrived. His normals are limited to fairly short range and are generally weak and clunky, which results in him crouching on the specific gimmick of his form specials. Slash Hanzo is even more contrived than the other, relying heavily on range moves and waiting for his opponent to approach because he can't. His ninja stars and flame attacks are functionally identical, but one hits high and one hits low. The stars can also be used in the air as a downward diagonal projectile, but the air isn't exactly Hanzo's strong suit. Beyond that, his teleport works like Galford's, dropping him from above, which works really well on AI, but is slow, and he has a quick explosion that he can do from the ground that hits hard and covers a fairly large range around him, but is more of an anti-approach option than strictly useful for any kind of aggressive play. You're left with this slow, passive character who's stuck in the kind of unfortunate spot of only being strong if the opponent is dumb enough to play into trying to approach him, with his only really good aggressive move being his super, which begins with a ninja star throw that covers a good portion of the screen and comes out fairly quickly. Bust for some reason switches to being a pure grappler. Hanzo can be pretty aggressive with this. He gets 2 teleports to position himself, and some of his grab specials have really solid range. The front flip is mid-range, the spider slide hits low and knocks the opponent down. They're fairly blockable, so a good opponent would never fall for a teleport front flip slash, but the x-rays of the bone damage happening when they land is cool enough to make it worth going for anyway. And when they do land, they hit very hard. Bust Super is one of the worst in the game, unblockable but extremely short range. It barely deals more damage than his standard throws and is far more punishable on whiff. You're better off spending Super on literally anything else. I don't particularly like either Hanzo. His design is really cool, but both have fundamental designs I dislike, be it your opponent being stupid enough to keep approaching the range spamming ninja, or your opponent being too shit to block slow, awkward grapples. Kazuki Kazama is one of the protagonists of some of the later Samurai Shodown games, starting with 4, where he shares the spotlight with his brother. Kazuki and his siblings were found underneath a bridge and from there trained to be ninjas. In 5 he has a fire demon sealed into his sword that manipulates his rage and gives him fire abilities, and in this game he's attempting to fight Yuga to rescue his sister. Kazuki's 2 forms are extremely distinct, with his slash form using his sword acting as a pretty aggressive character with a lot of options, while his bust form loses the sword for a weirdly passive counterplay character. Slash is a pretty typical character. He has a nasty overhead stab that seems to just tear opponents apart, and has some pretty neat specials. Flames of Disaster powers up the next special move, whether it's the slick, powerful command grab he can combo into, his fairly basic fireball, or his counter move. His super is basically impossible to land, shooting a beam straight up with short horizontal range to either side. When it does hit, it completely demolishes, but you'd need a very stupid opponent for it to hit, or a very good read as far as I can tell. Bust is pretty weird. His normals are fine if short range, but his aerial move is a belly flop that, while potentially kinda damaging, leaves him completely vulnerable. It seems that Bust Kazuki is supposed to wait for an approach, as his moves are all highly punishing, but not well suited for approaching. The goofy dash attack is the only one that seems suited to that, while the others are hard punishes for approaching opponents, a grounded area of effect that launches nearby opponents, an incredibly strong hit that takes ages to charge up, leaving Kazuki incredibly vulnerable, and a low kick that's slow and blockable, but combos into a simple 3-hit chain by mashing attack for huge damage. His super is also odd, as it briefly powers up his normal moves to become far stronger, which actually does let him be briefly aggressive. Ironically, despite being the manifestation of a demon of fiery rage, Bust Kazuki is a character centered on patience. He has the more interesting playstyle, but Slash is definitely more my speed. Setting up the boost and landing combos with the fireball or grab is way more satisfying. That said, neither is exactly my kind of character. Sogetsu Kazama, Kazuki's brother, is the calm half of the duo. His story is much the same, found under a bridge and with his own demon sealed in his sword, a water demon that is much less influenced by rage. Like Sogetsu, his slash form utilizes his sword for a balanced playstyle, while Bust has his demon take over and turns him into a kickmaster. Slash Sogetsu's characters are a nice balance of power and speed with decent range, while his specials focus on range and distance. Like Kazuki, he has a power-up move, although this one just highly increases the power of his fairly linear projectile, which he can also shoot diagonally in the air, while also having a water spout he can shoot from the ground, which is a pretty specific long-range attack when used dry, but can also be used as a finisher out of hits at close range, as well as a moderately slow teleport, which I found hard to get much use out of. Like his brother, his super is a massively powerful pillar that needs to be baited to make use of. Bust Sogetsu is one of my favorite characters in the game. Everything he has is centered on pressuring for openings. His moves are lightning fast. Thankfully, he's also not nearly as uncontrollable as his brother either. His projectile is slow and needs to be manually detonated, but deals massive damage, forcing opponents to jump or block it to avoid it, which gives Sogetsu options. And his other moves are a wicked powerful kicking uppercut that serves as an anti-air, while his Lotus Whirlpool hits low and auto-combos a few times for titanic damage when it gets in, with his super being this special but even more damaging. Slash Sogetsu's fine, he's a pretty standard character without a lot of frills. Bust Sogetsu is great, he's very high energy and fun to use. Genjuro Kibagami serves as the primary rival to Haohmaru since the second game in the series. The two were trained by the same master and formerly friends, but Genjuro's lust for power drove them apart and led Genjuro to becoming a killer for hire. Genjuro has interesting mirrors to Haohmaru. He's portrayed as and represented in gameplay as very serious and formal, but is also far more cruel, where Haohmaru is lighthearted and kind. It's somewhat worth noting that in Genjuro's ending for this game, he's killed by the son of someone he murdered, although his ending is non-canon as he continues to appear in the storyline after. Genjuro's special moves all use Hanafuda cards as a visual flair. It's likely just a detail to play into his vices, drinking, prostitutes, and with the cards, gambling, but also gives him a lot of style too. In both forms, Genjuro is a very strong, heavy, and precise character. His moves are strong and apply a lot of pressure, with Slash being the more reasonable of the pair, while Bust leans further into this high-power, high-risk playstyle. Bust has a fairly standard set of moves, a mid-range stab into auto combo, fairly long-distance projectile, big anti-air uppercut, and a really slick command grab. They're all pretty committal, but the payoff is huge, especially the multi-hit and command grab, although the uppercut serves as a good finisher. His super is extremely inconsistent, sending Hanafuda cards out in front of him that rarely seem to connect even point blank, although when it does land, it really lands. Bust doesn't change a lot. His stab multi-hit is slower but stronger. He has a very powerful stab that takes time to charge up, which is a cool move that's completely unusable to use, which starts with a sword swing, but extends into a Hanafuda card as a fake out. But all of these things have one common thread. They're very, very slow and committal, and you'll end up getting screwed over by being stuck into them. To add insult to injury, his super works identically, that is to say, not well. Slash Genjuro is pretty cool as a power character. You need to be sure of your swings and uses meaty hits to apply pressure and make openings. Bust Genjuro takes the concept a bit too far and falls apart. Taizan Morozumi was designed specifically for this game's arcade counterpart and since has only appeared in that game, and this game, which is a shame because this design is very cool. Perhaps it was an overcommittal to his story, although the Samurai Shodown 64 games and their handheld conversions weren't hugely popular, which likely didn't help. Morozumi is a pacifist, but after his family is killed by Yuga, he takes his magical spear calligraphy pen and uses it to slay him, afterwards returning to his pacifist life. Despite the really cool design and awesome visual flair, with the kanji he writes in the air taking on the attributes of their meanings, Morozumi is my least favorite character on the roster to actually use. Nothing he has feels safe, not his normals, not his specials, nothing. You whiff or get blocked, you're dead. Even his wake-up is terrible in a game where wake-ups are so near universally good I haven't even bothered to mention them. Slash Morozumi has a lot of neat, unique moves, two of which, the really cool fire command grab and the leap and shock, are really unsafe, but powerful and cool as hell. While his quick dash multi-hit is relatively fast and safe, and while his projectile is slow and a bit risky, it acts like Haohmaru, tossing opponents up to set them up to actually land his riskier stuff. He's pretty rough to use, he needs a lot of prediction to land anything, and even when he doesn't have the damage output or pressure application of someone like Genjuro. Even his really cool looking super is short range, slow and punishable. This is far and away the more playable Morozumi, as Bust is just weird. Fire's maintained between forms, but he loses everything else for borderline useless tools, a water spout that comes out from under opponents, which has a very specific range and isn't nearly as strong as his projectile and slash, and a new command grab with minimal range and huge vulnerability on miss that deals pretty low damage, but temporarily prevents the opponent from doing something. I think it might prevent meter use, which is cool, but not something the AI does all that often. The one upside is that his super is much improved, better range, pokes shield if blocked, and even cooler and stronger when it hits. I wish I liked using Morozumi. I like the design and style a lot, but both forms struggle in the same ways. He's a patience character that has to work 3 times as hard as everyone else for 1/3 of the reward. Nakoruru is a shrine maiden, which is a pretty foreign concept in the West. In the early days, Miko, as they're called in Japan, were shamans, although in modern eras they're more so relics of old traditions who perform dances and otherwise help keep shrines in shape. Nakoruru has been a mainstay of the series since the 1st century and is easily the most popular character in the franchise, crossing over into various other franchises from SNK and sometimes serving outright as SNK's mascot. Nakoruru serves as the protector of nature and fights solely for that purpose, but she's torn by her mutual feelings for Galford. In gameplay, Nakoruru is very weak but fast, relying on short combos before bouncing back to safety, giving her a different kind of patience play from characters like Genjuro. Her base movement and even specials are shared between her 2 forms, a low to the ground slide attack, a rising diagonal jump, a series of sword slashes that leaves a good opening for follow-ups, all of which play into this fast hit and run strategy. What changes between forms is her animal helper. Slash uses Mamahaha, a hawk, which she can launch at a light downward diagonal angle to serve as a projectile for setting up hits or an anti-air, and she can also be carried by the hawk, which lets her fly around. I'm sure there's some reason to use this, but I don't know it. Mamahaha is also used in her super, consisting of a barrage of laser hawks, which is decently safe due to its huge range, chips when blocked because it doesn't need to connect, and hits hard when it does land. On the other hand, Bust uses Shikaru, a wolf that can charge forward as a grounded low projectile, or be mounted for a charge or leap that can be extended into a dash. The first is fairly useful as a starter, pressure tool, and extender. The mounting is questionable as it doesn't seem to do a lot for her playstyle. The super also utilizes Shikaru. It's the coolest super in the game, which launches the opponent into the sky and changes depending on the stage's day or night. It's really fucking neat that they put in so much effort for one random super. I like Nakoruru's base moveset. She's fast and the poke and dip style suits me pretty well. Slash is definitely stronger, I think, while Mamaha is pretty limited in what she does. I found that her one use was stronger than Shikaru's multiple uses, although like I said, all the stuff I enjoy Nakoruru for is shared between both forms. Rimururu is Nakoruru's little sister, and trains to be the next guardian of nature so that her sister can live a happy life. That's pretty much the entirety of it. Rimururu's normals are extremely similar to Nakoruru's, and as such she has a very similar hit-and-run playstyle. Rimururu differs primarily in her specials, which are more traditional than Nakoruru's. Her forms are fairly different outside of the normals, with Slash playing into her aggressiveness, while Bust gives her defensive options for a more punish-based hit-and-run style. Her primary projectile is thrown low, hitting mid as it rises up close when used in combos, but quickly becomes an overhead that lightly targets enemies, forcing them to somewhat respect it and block it, which lets Rimururu move in. She also has a projectile that rises from the floor directly in front of her, which is mostly just a finisher, and a short-range spam of icicle projectiles that do great damage on hit but are fairly blockable, and can be finished with a huge spike that pierces shield if not reacted to, or just to deal huge damage at the end. Her super is easily one of the worst in the game, throwing a huge ice chunk a large distance in an arc, which I never managed to land. It's basically a very specific anti-air or hard punish for something. As for Bust, it has a variety of more defensive tools. An Ice Shield, which punishes approaching opponents and temporarily wards off projectiles, plus it serves as a short-range attack in general. An Ice Patch that also serves as a finisher, but can force opponents to retreat or jump over it as they'll slip if they stand on it, both of which give Rimururu a pretty good position. And for a more offensive tool, a short-range attack that seems to be a semi-command grab that deals solid damage. Bust Super is also genuinely great. It's an extremely powered up version of Slash's Icicle Storm. It deals titanic damage and even really solid chip on block, although it goes on so long, it can sometimes push an opponent blocking out of its range, allowing them to punish, although this is lessened by cornering them first. Rimururu is great. She has the good attributes of Nakoruru's normals, but adds a lot more utility to her kit through her specials. Slash is one of my favorite characters in the game, given her speed and fun tools. Bust is a neat variation, which is better and worse in ways. Defensive playstyles aren't my favorite, but I think she's generally fun either way. From birth, Shiki was tailored to be Yuga's servant, and falls in love with Asura during this, having a child with him that becomes a character in the game following this one. Unlike most characters introduced in the 64 series, Shiki does reappear as recently as the 2019 reboot, likely thanks to having some popularity in the crossover games, especially the Gals Fighters series. Like with Asura, her forms are split between her free self when using Slash and her possessed self with Bust. Her two forms share normals, although her specials heavily influence her playstyle. Slash uses her quick weak hits to fall into specials for a fast rushdown playstyle, while Bust is very gimmicky. Slash can chain her base moves in any of her specials. The A specials are a slide and an uppercut, both of which can be mashed into a second hit. Even if it doesn't land, they're both fairly punishable, so they need to be led into, but hit very hard when properly set up. Her B specials are both very short-range command grabs, one tossing opponents away and the other grounding them. They're basically identical and both fast, so it's just preference on positioning. She also has a teleport that she can use to get in or out, which outside of some dodging I found mostly useless due to it being pretty slow. Her super is the fairly standard dash in and attack on contact, but comes out fast and goes really far, making it at least decently reliable. Bust is really weird and does weird interesting things that don't really work together. None of her moves really follow in from her normals. Her teleport is a much stronger move, it's faster and it's grounded with the ability to attack directly out of it. It better serves the hit and run Shiki. Her dash equivalent is also a solid damage dealer, although the startup is a bit long. Her other two moves are strange. Her projectile, so to speak, creates a large circle of energy above where the opponent was when it started. It hits like a truck, but it's super slow and predictable, although that can sometimes be good for pressure situations. And her command grab, while weak, applies a status effect of all things, flipping the opponent's controls horizontally. It obviously does nothing to the AI, but it makes her intimidating as a boss character and could potentially be useful on human opponents. Her super is also odd. While one of the weakest in damage output, most of the damage dealt to the opponent is added back to Shiki's health bar, which makes it useful in clutch situations, especially given supers are heavily comeback mechanics in this game. Shiki is another favorite of mine. She's really fast paced and energetic. I've always liked the aggressive types. Bust on the other hand is a little too weird for me. She lacks Slash's flow and comes off as pretty gimmicky, interesting but not that fun to use. In the first Samurai Shodown game, Ukyo Tachibana served as Haohmaru's rival, being based on Sasaki Kojiro, the rival to the historical figure Haohmaru himself is based on. Although Ukyo was never villainous, and would in the second game pass the rival title to Genjuro. Ukyo's plots tend to center on his romances, as he's quite popular with the ladies, but his tuberculosis, which in the 1700s was basically a death sentence, keeps him from his true love. In this game he's seeking a flower that can cure tuberculosis, which his lover also has, and after he finds it, gives it to her and passes away. Like Genjuro's death, this is non-canon and reverted in the next game. Perhaps not so coincidentally, Ukyo plays in and has a personality that in ways aren't too dissimilar from Genjuro. Slow, refined, and methodical bait and punish. His normals are fairly heavy and slow, while his specials in each form are the punishes. Slash is more traditional, a huge slash that deals massive damage, and knockback, which can also be used in the air as a heavy aerial move, although Ukyo's fall speed is the slowest in the game, giving him a strong disadvantage in the air, which a lot of the characters do pretty decently in this game. He can toss an apple and follow it up into a series of powerful slashes, which leaves you very vulnerable when blocked, but he can also use a fake out apple to bait out some room to punish, plus a solid command grab, while his super is a pretty standard jump in and slash hard. He's fine, bait and punish isn't my favorite playstyle, and I prefer it on Genjuro, but it's alright. Boss Ukyo leans further into this playstyle. He maintains his giant slash and has a new slash that he can do either high or low with A or B respectively, which is pretty quick and essentially a 50-50 for the opponent. Plus it shoots out a wind blade, giving it a bit of extra range. While his remaining specials are all counters. They look identical but send the opponent different places, and both are extremely powerful, playing in further to the bait and punish aspects. He also has one of the coolest supers in the game, doing that very anime thing where he slashes the opponent and talks to them. According to someone I know who is capable of reading this, it roughly translates to, "Even the hand holding the blade is dyed in red on this night," which ties in the line from his ending about the flower that cured his lover's tuberculosis being stained with blood, which is really cool. It also does a fucking ton of damage and comes out really fast. Ukyo is not my cup of tea, Slash is fine, but Genjuro is more my style, and Bust is so reliant on counters that it makes me uncomfortable. He's not awful, but he's definitely not a character that I would ever be able to play. Like Hanzo, Jubei Yagyu is directly inspired by the historical figure of the same name, down to the eye patch he's frequently depicted with that he probably did not have. The two were in fact in the same clan, the Tokugawa clan, and many fictional depictions present them as friends. There's no real record that this is the case, but it's a fun idea. Jubei is a ronin, a lordless samurai who works as a spy and demon hunter for hire for the government, with a weakness for sweets which is frequently brought up, making him fall a little beyond Haohmaru on the silly scale. Like Charlotte, he wasn't in the arcade version of this game, but returned here for his popularity. Despite sharing the same powerful, low-mid speed attacks in both forms, the two can be pretty different. Slash being full blow and rushdown, while Bust is almost entirely focused on baiting and punishing with counters. Guess which one I like. Slash and Bust share a projectile, a grounded shockwave that serves to apply pressure, while Slash more specifically has an odd move, a charging dash that can be mashed into an uppercut, which serves as a fast movement option, or follow-up to attacks, and deals decent damage, as well as a series of sword stabs that takes ages to start up, but deals solid chip on block, and if it does land, it's very devastating. His super is pretty rough, a giant blast in front of him that deals massive damage, but is about as slow and predictable as could be. Bust replaces everything but the projectiles with counters, 3 entire counters, that position opponents differently on preference, and are very powerful, but as the nature of counters goes, it's all about the prediction. His super is a bit better than the other one, combining his 2 moves from Slash into one long super move, which is both quick and extremely powerful. You can probably predict my preferences. Bust Yagyu is too difficult and high skill for me, and Slash Yagyu is a pretty awesome rushdown character who's another favorite of mine to use. Yuga is the final boss of this game and is selectable by holding B while selecting Kuroko, who I'll get to soon. His name seems to relate to Asura's, and Hindu believes Yuga is a period of time, painting Yuga as an eternal threat of sorts. Yuga comes from the demon realm like Asura and plans to merge with the human realm, and does so by possessing others, namely Shiki and Asura. Yuga's two modes are a bit of an oddity. In the arcade mode, they're fought back to back, and to aid in escalation, Yuga's slash mode is relatively underpowered prologue to the fully powered bust mode. Although they're both pretty busted, with Yuga's forward normal hitting the opponent regardless of where they are, horizontally or vertically, which gives them immense pressure, while having a toolkit of annoying but slow attacks to complement it. Slash gets a screen-wide laser with a bit too much startup, a lightning bolt that can be dropped at different distances to do immense damage, or a short-range burst to knock back opponents to a suitable range, plus a very slow teleport. Uniquely, both Yugas have their super moves as cards, making them inaccessible by default. Bust is a true final form improvement. The laser is way larger and hits as hard as most supers if it isn't blocked, and can be paired with a slow ground projectile he has to guarantee a laser hit on blocking the low hits. He has a new aerial that shoots blasts in a wide arc towards the ground, a useless backflip into an advancing kick, becoming briefly invisible as a dodge, a huge command grab that's fairly short range but can shred most of the health bar, a big shock aerial effect move for backing off opponents. His moveset is far and away the largest in the game, and it is wide and powerful enough to make him intimidating against boss and trivializes the game in arcade. Fun as a gimmick, but if this game ever had a competitive scene, it's hard to imagine that Yuga would have been allowed at all. Maybe Slash could have been, Bust definitely not. Kuroko is an odd topic to tackle. He serves as the referee for matches in many of the Samurai Shodown games, as well as being a secret joke boss in others. He is, as his name hints at, based on a Japanese stagehand who would dress in all black in order to manipulate props and objects with the audience ignoring their existence for immersion. Although I hate to build up to nothing, as in this game he's just a cute random button. Bust and Slash have a different animation when chosen, but seem to have no impact on what character or style are chosen. Gendara is also kind of worth mentioning, although there truthfully isn't much to say. He's a mindless monster created by Yuga and serves as an arcade-only boss. While the sprite is huge and cool, the fight consists of it either using short-range punches or full-screen disruptions like dropping rocks or shaking the ground. The optimal strategy seems to be simply jumping in and out while landing aerials, which makes the immovable monster nearly incapable of landing hits. It's a neat set piece for the game, but not very interesting to fight against after the first few times when you kind of just figure it out. This game, or more specifically its arcade counterpart, also had a prequel OVA, two 30-minute animations made direct for Laserdisc called Samurai Spirits 2 Asura-Zanmaden. As a story lead-in, it's pretty much an introduction for Asura without much else, and outside of Nakoruru, don't give a lot of insight into most characters, although the action is pretty cool, especially when Asura is involved. This OVA also got novelized, but that's not gonna happen. I'm not doing that. Would I recommend it? The hand-drawn animation and music are nice, the style is decent, when the fights come, it's a cool few minutes. But between those, it's pretty unexceptional and dull to the point that I don't really know what else to say about it. Samurai Shodown 2 Pocket Fighting Series is an awesome little game. Handheld fighting games have a dreadful track record. During the fighting game peak, how many good ones came out between any of the Gameboy consoles? It speaks to the mastery of fighting games SNK possess that they pulled it off so well. And on top of that, it's incredible looking for the same category and has nice music too. There's absolutely nothing to complain about, and especially with the fantastic Switch version on the Neo Geo Pocket Selection with multiplayer of all things. It's a lot of fun, definitely pretty single player focused, but if you can be happy with that, this is a great little novelty.